Melissa Mountain here for Truth Stream Media, and I just had to bring you an update on this story that I wrote yesterday because the new information that's coming out is blowing my mind. I wrote this story, report, was Navy Yard shooter gang stalked with mind control microwave weapons, and I wrote it because on August 7th, Aron Alexis, the suspected shooter in the Navy Yard shooting that happened in Washington, D.C. earlier this week, left 13 people dead, actually had called the Rhode Island Police Department on August 7th, claiming that 3 people were sent to follow him and keep him awake by talking to him and sending vibrations through his body. More specifically, he said that he was hearing voices that were talking to him through the walls, floor, and ceiling of his hotel room, which caused him to change hotel rooms three times to try and get away from it. And that they were, quote, using some sort of microwave machine to send vibrations through the ceiling, penetrating his body so he couldn't fall asleep. And he thought these people were going to hurt him. And he implored the officer that he did not have a mental condition. He was just really scared. And these kinds of weapons are not science fiction at all. As soon as I heard that, immediately I went, whoa, because this is something that our government has been doing research on since the Cold War. It's based on Nikola Tesla's research, and it's been around for an awfully long time. But a lot of people think that it's just crazy, and if you talk about stuff like that, you're nuts. However, I mean, right here I cite this document. This is a declassified Army intelligence document that was actually published in 1998, which talks about the bioeffects of selected non-lethal weapons, and more specifically, radio frequency directed energy weapons. And it discusses how these weapons can have the incapacitating effect of microwave hearing, which is to basically voice to skull, put voice communications directly into someone's head that only they can hear. And how this was successfully demonstrated back in 1998, although there are other documents that show it was actually successfully demonstrated many, many years earlier. But that microphones next to a person suffering from this or being targeted by this would not be able to pick up that sound. So it only goes into the person's head that it's being targeted against, and no one else can hear it. And they actually go on to talk about how they can use this kinds of technology to disrupt neural control, and they could activate specific forms of behavior, such as sexual, aggressive, and ingestive activities. And this is something that's just been on record. This exists, and a lot of people don't realize it. And if you try to talk about it, then they think you're crazy. And actually, when they first reported on this in the mainstream media, the way they kind of spun it was to make it seem like that's just more evidence to prove the guy's nuts. However, in light of new information, they really can't do that anymore, because this has now come out. This is the Washington Post from today. Officials, Navy Yard shooter carved odd messages into his gun before carnage. And this gives me the chills, you guys. The phrases he carved into his weapon were, "better off this way," and "my elf weapon." Ugh. So ELF, what does that stand for? Well, even the mainstream media admits that ELF stands for extremely low frequency, which is the type of frequencies that are used in these microwave weapons. And then they go on to say they can refer to weather or communication efforts. It's just blowing my mind because they straight up admit here weather efforts. That means that extremely low frequency waves can be used to modify the weather, and they're admitting it in the mainstream media. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that if you talked about this even 6 months ago, they would be all over you and calling you insane. And they do go on to admit that this is a conspiracy theorist issue, where they talk about how extremely low frequency waves are used in the military project, which was HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. And they say HAARP is often cited by conspiracy theorists. Yeah, you think, because this thing is used, obviously, as you even admit here, Washington Post, in modifying the weather. It says so right there. And this article just it goes on to mention several things that I just have to share with you guys. First of all, it talks about how on August 23rd, Alexis visited the VA Medical Center because he was complaining of insomnia, and he went to get sleep medication. And then by 5 days later, he was back requesting a refill, complaining that it was attributed to his work schedule. Well, of course he would complain that it was contributed to his work schedule. You think he's going to tell them that voices are talking to him, especially after this police report, where quite obviously after he was honest and said, "Hey, I'm hearing all these voices, they're coming through the walls, I think people are using pulse weapons on me." This officer here, if you can see here in this Sharpie markered out portion down here at the bottom, you can still kind of see the tops and bottom of the words. The phrase showing signs of some sort of mental deficiency is used right here. So obviously this officer thought the guy was nuts. And he probably figured out at this point that he can't really be honest with people about what he's suffering through, because if he is, they're probably going to throw him into some kind of psych ward. And on his second visit to the VA, this is when they gave him the antidepressant trazodone, which a lot of people have seized upon and said, oh, see, he was on antidepressants. Yeah, he was, but not before he was having these issues where he thought that he was hearing voices coming through the walls, ceiling, and floor, and that they were using microwave weapons on him. This article also goes on to say that he had been estranged from his family for many years, that they had not talked to their brother in years, so he was definitely a loner and the kind of person that's been targeted in these types of situations. And here's another article talking about it on the Washington Times, 42 days after microwave mind control complaint, Alexis kills 12. And this one, it also mentions the same document that I mentioned, the bioeffects of selected non-lethal weapons, written after my article was written. Just want to point that out. But anyway, they talk about how Julianne McKinney, former director of the Electronic Surveillance Project at the now defunct Association of National Security Alumni in Silver Springs, Maryland, self-identifies as a U.S. Army intelligence veteran, self-published Microwave Harassment and Mind Control Experimentation in 1992 and Mind Control in the Secret State in 2008. And according to her paper, she says the long-term objectives of these harassment and experimentation campaigns appear to be to redirect targeted individuals' feelings of hopelessness, anger, and frustration towards racial and ethnic groups and towards select prominent political figures, and to force the individual to commit an act of violence, whether suicide or murder, under conditions which can be plausibly denied by the government. I mean, they're admitting this kind of stuff goes on in the mainstream media. It's blowing my mind. Again, if you had brought this up even 6 months ago, they would have called you insane. And it also goes on to talk about an eerily similar tragedy. On May 30th, 1991, Carl A. Campbell shot a U.S. Navy commander, Edward J. Higgins, at least 5 times with a .22 caliber near a bus stop, leaving him dead, and that a judge found him innocent by reason of insanity because in court papers, prosecutors said Campbell, who'd been treated earlier for paranoid schizophrenia, believed the U.S. government had planted a mind-controlling computer chip in his brain. Again, these themes continue to come up, and I'm blown away at the fact that you're seeing this in a mainstream media outlet. Like I said, when Alexis went to the VA and he was seeking treatment for his insomnia, he did not mention the stuff that he mentioned in the August 7th police report about hearing the voices. And a lot of support groups tell you not to do that. This is one of them, Freedom from Covert Harassment and Surveillance. This is talking about what can you do if this happens to you. And they say right here, when talking to the police, your doctor, and hospital staff, please do not mention anything about your targeting to them. Do not mention electronic harassment, directed energy weapons, or organized stalking, because if you do, you risk being hauled away to a psychiatric unit. And so, again, Alexis probably figured this out. He probably started doing some research after this began to happen to him. He probably figured it out and got smart and didn't mention it, knowing what they would probably do, how they would react to him. So now I just want to play this for you really quick so you can get an idea of how this is used. This is a billboard that was put up for a ghost hunting television show, Paranormal State. And this is a 40-story building that has this billboard, and you can see little speakers up at the top. But when you walk underneath it, you can hear the voice as if it's coming from right behind your shoulder. Okay, so you can see the speakers right up here, and it's a whispering voice saying, "It's not your imagination. What's that? Who's there?" Now just think about this for a moment. Think about if you had a voice constantly talking to you, whispering things or saying things to you all the time that no one else could hear, right into your mind, basically, and that you couldn't get any sleep, and that it went on and on and on. I mean, they could have these people who are doing this compartmentalized. They could be bringing them into a booth and having them record a few statements, not even realizing what those recordings are going to be used for, and then they could be used later, sent out as a directed energy weapon into someone's head and make them hear that over and over and over again, and just to drive them insane. I mean, after you deprive someone of sleep for long enough, I mean, obviously this was going on for weeks. If this police report happened August 7th, he's going to the VA on August 23rd, and then the shooting happens a few weeks later. And I mean, I've got to say it again, guys, he carved better off this way into his weapon. I mean, were they telling him, just do this, you'll be better off this way? If you just do this, if you just put yourself out of your misery, you'll be better off this way? I mean, oh, it gives me the chills. But again, I mean, even in this article, in the mainstream media, in the Washington Times, they talk about here how, I mean, this lady wrote a paper saying, look, this is used to force the individual to commit acts of violence, whether suicide or murder, under conditions which can be plausibly denied by the government. And, you know, I'm assuming that the only reason they have to come forward with this now is because the information came out about the carvings into his weapon and what they stand for. But if you'd have mentioned this stuff even a few months ago, you would be nuts. So I just had to bring this up because I can't believe this is all coming out. I mean, this is the world that we live in. So I'll keep you guys updated on this story. Truth Stream Media.